So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get started with our program. And what better way to start off a discussion about the U.S. Venezuela policy than with the Trump administration's Special Representative for Venezuela, Ambassador Elliott Abrams. There's not really much to introduce about Elliott Abrams. Everybody knows that he has been a champion, a defender of freedom for oppressed peoples for as long as anyone can remember. I'm privileged to call him a friend. I was fortunate enough to serve with Ambassador Abrams in the George W. Bush administration at the National Security Council. And I've seen him up close and from afar, and he never disappoints in his mission. I think that Venezuelan Americans and all Venezuelans are fortunate that Ambassador Abrams has agreed to take on this challenging portfolio. As I said, he is the Special Representative for Venezuela at the Department of State, and right before he came back into government, he was over at the Council on Foreign Relations, where he is now on a leave of absence. He served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor in the administration of George Bush, and where he supervised U.S. policy in the Middle East in the White House. So with that as introduction, I'd love to turn the microphone over to Ambassador Elliott.
Good morning, muy buenos días. Great to see all of you. Se habla español, ¿sí? It's really great to be here. And I want to begin with the bottom line. I want to begin with the only thing I'm going to say today that's really important, and that is this administration and the United States government are absolutely and irrevocably committed to the return of democracy to Venezuela. I say that because occasionally you see newspaper reports saying, oh, people are frustrated, people are getting tired, the president's frustrated. First, let me say, of course the president's frustrated. Aren't you frustrated? We're all frustrated. I am certainly. Juan Guaido is. 30 million Venezuelans are frustrated because it has taken now so many years of suffering in Venezuela. And yet, today, of course, the suffering continues and the terrible corruption and brutality and repression of the Maduro regime also continue. The lesson that we learn from this is we have to keep on struggling. We have to keep on with this policy of applying pressure against this regime without stopping. It's been an extraordinary policy for one good reason. It's a completely bipartisan policy. You know, you're here today. Today is the beginning of the public impeachment hearings. Capitol Hill is in many ways as divided as we've ever seen it. Jose and I remember some days, people like to talk about the past as if, you know, in the old days, it was complete partisan unity. Forget that. But it's as bad as it's ever been today. But not when it comes to Venezuela. On Venezuela, Democrats and Republicans agree. People sometimes ask, why do we care about this? Well, first of all, every American has to care about the humanitarian situation in Venezuela, the extraordinary suffering. Any numbers you care to choose, the infant mortality rate, the availability of hospitals, the availability of clean water, the availability of electricity, the fact that now perhaps 15% of the population has felt they had to leave their homes because conditions were simply intolerable. So, as human beings, we all care. We care about the security threat to the neighbors of Venezuela from having a regime there that is closely tied to Cuba and Russia and China. We care about the impact on democracy in all of Latin America, because democracy is now a struggle in Latin America. And the fate of Venezuela is going to be critically important. When Venezuela returns to democracy, everyone will know the cause of democracy has won, has been victorious in South America and all of Latin America. So we struggle, all of us, for that day. And we see the terrible situation of now maybe 4.5 million Venezuelans who've had to leave their country because conditions were simply impossible. Now, you will hear some people say, you know why those conditions are so terrible? U.S. sanctions. This is completely false. And Venezuelans know it. We have even last week some opinion polls asking Venezuelans, why do you think conditions are terrible in Venezuela? You know, 10% say, oh, it's el bloqueo. It's the American sanctions. But the vast majority say it's the regime. It's Maduro. And that is the truth. How do we know it's the truth? Again, any of those numbers you want to look at about the conditions of life for the people of Venezuela, they start to really take a precipitous fall in 2014, and a much deeper fall in 2016. This is long before there were any significant American sanctions. It's due to the mismanagement. It's due to the corruption. It's due to the theft of the resources that belong to the Venezuelan people by people in this regime. You may have seen the news story in the last few days about the family of Celia Flores buying not a home, a street with all of the houses on this street. We know of people from this regime who live in cafes and nightclubs and mansions in Europe with the resources that were stolen from the Venezuelan people. It's not U.S. sanctions. U.S. sanctions are meant to deprive the regime of resources to use to repress the people of Venezuela and keep those resources for the people of Venezuela for the day after, when democracy returns. Now, people have asked the question, why hasn't it happened yet? It's a good question. It's a fair question. And it's a fair question this week when we look at Bolivia. Bolivia, where we saw the army say, no, we're with the people, not with Evo Morales. I will give you a one-word answer to that. It's a complicated question, but I'll give you a one-word answer. Cuba. Cuba. How many Cuban intelligence agents were there in Bolivia? I'm sure there were a few, but muy poco. But not in Venezuela. Thousands of Cuban intelligence agents permeating the government. Fuerte Cuna, Ejesim, Sebin, Ejército, Guardia Nacional, Miraflores. We always point out the amazing fact that Nicolas Maduro's own personal bodyguards are Cubans, not Venezuelans. They're there to spy on the army. They're there to pull away from the army anyone whose complete loyalty to Madurismo is not reliable. You do this for year after year after year. You change the culture of life in the army. I don't think there is any bigger reason that explains this difference. Now, we in the United States have tried, with the help of Congress, to give more and more resources to the people of Venezuela as they try to live, to survive. The number is now just over $650 million. And more will come, because there is bipartisan support here in Congress to help Venezuelans in Venezuela and those who have had to leave their country and become migrants and refugees in the Caribbean and in South America. There was just a conference on this question in Brussels, and the Europeans pledged tens of millions of dollars more. Much more is needed. Much more is needed. We know that, and more will certainly be coming from the administration and from Congress. Meanwhile, we are also trying to get Europeans and South Americans in particular to do something else. Sanctions on the people who lead this regime, as we have done in the US. They should not be able to travel freely. They should not be able to steal all this money, keep it in banks all over the place, and then spend it. And we know they spend it. We know they spend it in Europe, which is where their children and wives and mistresses are, living the high life. We know this. So what we have asked, particularly the EU, to do is to go beyond the 25 people. It's now 25 people they have sanctioned, and rightly, to do much more than this. It's significant because if the people who lead this regime begin to see, well, not welcome in Rio and Sao Paulo, not welcome in Lima, not welcome in Buenos Aires, not welcome in any of these capitals, not welcome in Madrid, not welcome in Lisbon, not welcome in Rome, it will change their calculation about their future and the future of the country. So we are going to continue this not only with our own sanctions, and we keep adding to the list, which is hundreds of people now, but pushing the EU, which agreed in principle that they will sanction more people. It's really slow. You know, we've had this experience where you say, that's great, you're going to sanction more people. When? Well, we're developing a list. The list will be ready in 3 months. And then you say, well, then what happens when the list is ready? Well, now we have to have meetings. Takes a long time. But we will keep pushing. And we've seen this in South America as well. We've seen Brazil, for example, and Peru recently, add to the list of names of what's really a no-fly list. You are not welcome in this country. That's what they need to be hearing. We need to pursue it more, particularly in Miami. And you will read, as the Department of Justice and other parts of the US government pursue cases against individuals and companies who have stolen the money of the people of Venezuela. Now why, let me go back to the question of why is the regime still there? I gave you the one-word answer about the army, which was Cuba. I think this is more broadly true of the regime. I genuinely believe the regime would be gone already if it weren't for the thousands of Cubans that are serving as a kind of central nervous system of this regime. The second reason is Russia. Something like 70% of all the oil that this regime produces now goes to Rosneft, the Russian oil company. They buy the oil, they take the oil, they ship the oil, they sell the oil, they arrange financing. It would be impossible for the regime to do this without the help of Russia, which is something we are thinking about how we're going to react to this more and more. Now, they're having more and more trouble doing it because of our sanctions. We know this. We can see ships, tankers, with oil from, I was going to say PDVSA, there are two PDVSAs now, the good PDVSA and the bad PDVSA. Why are they hanging around at sea? Because people are reluctant to buy this oil. We find them doing things like selling from one company to another, moving the oil from one ship to another in an effort to hide it, to hide the fact that it came from Venezuela. Because so many buyers are saying, well, you have all these American sanctions, I don't want to buy Venezuelan oil. We are going to continue these sanctions, and we're going to continue these pressures in an effort to deprive the regime of money. I want to come back for a second to this question of sanctions, because what are they doing with the money they have? I have had people say to me, people from UN agencies, we need more money. We need to get them more money. We need to get the regime more money so that they can provide for the people of Venezuela. Well now, what are they doing with the resources they have? Roughly $200 million a month going to pay down the debt they owe to Rosneft. Think about that. $200 million a month. Rosneft was at one point owed about $5 or $6 billion. It's under $1 billion now. $200 million a month being paid back. You would think the regime, if it cared, which it does not, about the people of Venezuela, would say to Rosneft, you know what? We have people in this country starving. We can't pay you back. You need to wait a year or two. We need to use that money to buy food and medicine. By the way, you know that they could buy all the food and all the medicine they want in the United States. Our sanctions never cover food and medicine. And in fact, they are buying food all throughout this year, small amounts, in the United States. They know that they can do that. But they're giving this money, first of all, to Russia to pay down debts. And they're paying it down by billions every year that could be going to the people of Venezuela. The same thing of China. Paying down debts. Instead of saying, wait, we need a year or two. The people of Venezuela need this money. We need food, we need medicine. They do not do that. And then, foreign aid to Cuba. Running now at about 80,000 barrels a day. Think about that. Hundreds of millions of dollars every month in oil. I think it comes to about $1 billion a year in oil for Cuba. To pay for those intelligence agents that help brutalize the people of Venezuela. Venezuela is in no condition to be giving foreign aid today to Cuba or anyone else. And yet, the flow continues to bail out the communist regime in Havana. The policy of the United States is 100% support for interim President Juan Guaido. I am able to communicate with Juan Guaido frequently. We talk, we exchange messages. I think he's done a fantastic job since he became the interim president. When I came in January, you know, everyone said to me, all the experts said to me, Marco said, all the other experts said to me, you know, if Maduro doesn't fall in 3 months, that was the usual number, 3 months, the Venezuelan opposition will be completely divided. You'll see. Guaido will be gone, the parties will be fighting. Here we are in November. And it's very unfortunate, of course, that we are here and democracy has not returned, but the opposition remains united. The interim government still exists. Juan Guaido remains interim president, and all the other parties respect that fact. Some people say, no, maybe you don't have 3 months, maybe you have 6 months. Well, you know that it's about a month ago now, maybe more, some of the smaller parties, which in the usual rotation would have named a speaker for the National Assembly, a president of the National Assembly, to replace Juan Guaido, said, we don't want to do that. We're not going to do that. In January, we're going to vote for Guaido again. And they will. So what is the regime trying to do? Well, they have an idea. They have a plan, which is to destroy the last remaining democratic institution in Venezuela, the National Assembly. Part of this plan is probably sending the PSUV diputados back. Certainly part of it is this mesa de diálogo, this mesita, where they have gotten a few of the tiny parties, one-person parties, two-person parties, to negotiate with the regime. No one is fooled by this nonsense. You've seen all the governments of the EU denounce this as a joke, as a farce, where the government buys a few people or parties and then says, oh, we're negotiating with the opposition. That's not the democratic opposition of Venezuela. We know who the democratic opposition forces are. We know who the legitimate democratic forces of Venezuela are, led by Juan Guaido. And we know now that there will be protests on the 16th of November, where Venezuelans will, despite regime repression, despite the threats now to send thugs into the streets, people will come out and protest. I'll just close with this. I see what happens as Juan Guaido travels around the country. You may have seen yesterday he was in the National Assembly, of course. He's president of the National Assembly. How did he go there? In the metro. You think Nicolas Maduro would do that? You think he can show his face? Guaido travels each week around the country. No publicity, right? Can't be on TV. They're not allowed to cover his activities. When he goes to give a speech, they turn off the internet. But thousands of Venezuelans, always, everywhere, show up to show what they want, which is to recover the democracy that Venezuela had and begin the recovery of the prosperity and begin the process by which millions of Venezuelans who had to flee their homes can return and rebuild the Venezuela that we all knew 20 years ago, a free and prosperous Venezuela. That's our goal, and we are going to win. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot, Ambassador Abrams. I'm proud to say that the question and answer system works. I have a question. In all seriousness, Ambassador, yesterday we found out that Spanish police have lost track of Hugo Carvajal. Is there anything you could tell us about that situation? And it comes against the backdrop of what has been, in some minds, an unsteady relationship with Spain on the issue of Venezuela. Spain being a NATO ally, socialist government. I'm not sure if it's for now or if it fell, but how the issue of Carvajal and the broader issue of Spain.
The escape of Carvajal is a great embarrassment, of course, to the government of Spain. He was theoretically under house arrest. One of their courts made what we thought was really an incomprehensible decision against extradition to the United States. That was reversed on appeal. The higher court then ruled, no, he has to be extradited. So they then went to his house and, what a surprise, he's not there. It's an embarrassing situation, of course. We hope that the Spanish police will track him down, arrest him, and then extradite him to the United States. Now I had a number of people say, you know, you went after Carvajal. What is the message to the military? You know, he offered information. Isn't the message to the military that cooperation with the United States doesn't bring you anything? Well, there are other examples. Christopher Figuera, for example, that show that cooperation with the United States can be rewarded. The case of Carvajal is a different case and shows one principle that we have. If there are sanctions against you, sanctions are reversible. Treasury Department sanctions done with foreign policy advice from the State Department are always reversible. If you change your situation, you change your status, criminal indictments are not the same. Criminal indictments are different. If you traffic drugs to the United States, we're going to go after you. If you are under indictment, you know, hire a lawyer and go talk to the Department of Justice and see if you can negotiate a deal. It has nothing to do with the State Department or the Treasury Department. That's the message. If you're trafficking drugs to the United States, we're going to go after you. I am less critical than some people in the press about the position of Spain. I think Spain has been leading in the EU. The EU countries often look to Spain as more expert, and they are more familiar with the situation in Venezuela than many European countries. And we've had good cooperation with Spain on many issues. Now, of course, they just had an election. It appears that they have a new coalition between the governing party and a party further to the left. We also know that the foreign minister, Borrell, is going, I think, the 1st of December to Brussels, so there will be a new foreign minister. So, of course, we're very interested in seeing whether Spanish policy will change, but I think I'll leave it at that.
You spoke about the regimes, the Maduro regime's enablers, Cuba, Russia. How is the administration thinking about the Chinese presence in Venezuela and some of us appears playing a double game where they're trying to protect their investments, they're trying to protect their name brand, and how are we approaching China for its role in Venezuela?
The Chinese have the biggest exposure to Venezuela, $20 billion. It's a lot of money. And when I meet with the Chinese, the main message from the Chinese is, you know, we want our money back. And we answer them. And what I tell them is, you want your money back? You will never get it back from Nicolas Maduro, because he is destroying the economy of Venezuela. You will get it back only in a prosperous Venezuela when Maduro is gone. Because when Maduro is gone, we can lift the sanctions. The Chinese say that they are not defending Maduro. They say they have given him economic advice that he does not take. It's possible because, I mean, look at the way he's destroyed the economy of Venezuela. They say Their situation is purely commercial, purely economic. All they want is their money back. It's not quite true. Everywhere the Chinese are, they provide some political and ideological support for communist regimes, for communist parties, for socialist parties, for anti-democratic parties, for regimes like the Maduro regime. What we're urging them is you can survive, you can compete. Look, you know the Chinese 2 weeks ago won the competition to build the Bogota Metro. This is a friendly government to the United States, Colombia, President Duque. This is a very friendly government to the people of Venezuela, hosting now about 1.5 million Venezuelans. But this was a free competition. So our message to the Chinese is, if you want a relationship that's purely commercial, you can have that. But you should stop supporting the Maduro regime. And they are supporting the Maduro regime. They're supporting them politically with vetoes in the United Nations Security Council. They always join the Russians in these vetoes. And they're supporting them with a lot of high-tech equipment that helps the regime repress the people of Venezuela. So I would say the Chinese pretend that they have only a commercial and economic interest. They are supporting the regime.
Final question. Ambassador, what can you tell us about the attitudes within the Venezuelan military in terms of, one makes the assumption that the U.S. Attempts to make contacts and take the temperature. And, you know, basically going back to your earlier comments about Bolivia, where the high command basically put its foot down on the machinations against the country's democracy. We know that Maduro, of course, has decapitated the Venezuelan military and turned the senior officer corps into nothing but political cronies. But from the mid-level officers on down, there's a lot of Venezuelan military that are suffering the same deprivations as the people. How do you see the situation, or what can you say about your sense of attitudes within the military?
Yeah. Complicada y difícil. I think what you said is right. Look, if you, let's say you are a captain, you have a mother and father, aunts, uncles, cousins. You know how they're living. You know the unemployment rate. You know people have no water. You know people have no electricity. In your own family. So you know what this regime is doing. You also know that if you speak up, you may be jailed, you may be tortured, you may be killed. Think of Capitan Acosta, tortured and killed. You know the Cubans are there watching you. So your situation is very difficult. You know the high command is so far loyal to Maduro. You know that people in the high command are making a lot of money. Probably making less money now than they made in past years, but